a stranger tries to snatch a child right out of a stroller.
He won't let go of the stroller.
We're talking about an attempted kidnapping here.
A good Samaritan intervenes, but this man won't give up.
He's going to probably kill somebody, so we need help.
And coming up later, another child targeted in broad daylight.
A man comes running full speed and tries to grab a child.
He wants this child and he is determined to take her. This is a mother's worst nightmare.
New York City 911. Do you need police, fire, or medical? The police. This guy tried to grab a little child. Oh my God. Can you just get somebody out here?
Monday, November 9th, 2020. New York City's Madison Square Park.
It's a lovely park. My girlfriend and I are meeting up with one of our friends, and we're sitting on the park bench talking to our friend, and I hear commotion. I hear yelling, I hear screaming, and I want to check it out, make sure everything's okay.
Brian walks away to see what's going on.
I'm thinking that he'll be gone for a couple minutes and then he'll return.
But neither Brian or Mandy have any idea that he's about to walk into a dangerous situation.
I walk up, and there's a man, and he's playing tug-of-war with a mom with a baby in a stroller.
Behind the crowd of bystanders, a frightening altercation is taking place.
And she's pleading, let go, please let go.
This man tried to grab this lady's stroller.
Is the baby in the stroller?
She is pleading for him to let go of the stroller, and he is saying things like, how do you know this is your baby?
I want to identify the kid. I want to identify him.
He's very aggressive.
I want to know if that's my kid. Get away. I want to know if that's my kid.
This is a parent's worst nightmare. She's trying to wrestle away her own baby from this maniac.
People quickly surround the mother, trying to help her pry the stranger's hands off her baby's stroller.
And so as this crowd is forming around them, they're screaming at him, he's screaming at them, and this woman is terrified.
But he won't let go of the stroller. He says, let go of the stroller. Let go of the stroller, I'm gonna knock you out.
We're talking about an attempted kidnapping here. We don't know if this person's armed. We don't know what they're capable of.
I hear people saying, call the police, call the police.
That's when Brian, a trained martial arts coach, decides he has to do something.
Before that moment, I'm just observing. I don't want to escalate the situation. But at that point, I feel that it was only a matter of seconds till it was gonna come to blows. So I walk around the man, I put my hands around him and use a jiu-jitsu move to bring him to the ground. I transition to what's called a seatbelt grip. You're behind them. Essentially, they're wearing you like a backpack. Your legs are around them, your arms are around them, and you can really limit what they are able to do. I want to keep him restrained, keep myself safe, keep the crowd safe, and also him away from the mom and the baby. It really allows me to be able to control someone without hurting them. I'm just holding him until police show up or someone shows up to take care of the situation.
He doesn't have to do this, but he jumps in to try to help this young lady and the baby out of nowhere. Is the Good Samaritan of the day.
No, I'm not, man. You trying to take a kid? You trying to take a kid?
But now that he's pinned to the ground, the man only becomes more angry.
Stop it, liar. Liar.
As others try to help Brian, even sitting on the man's feet, the crowd grows larger.
There's an angry mob forming. People are walking by asking, what's going on? And bystanders will tell them, this man just tried to take a baby from a mother.
The crowd is angry. They are calling him all kinds of names. And this is becoming an even more dangerous situation because now we don't know if the crowd wants to exact some sort of street justice against the perpetrator.
An attempted kidnapping in Manhattan tried to take a stroller with a baby inside.
As the man who tried to steal a woman's baby angrily thrashes his arms, the crowd loses control.
People will get mad, and the more the crowd is antagonizing him, the more he's fighting back.
Get the you're lying.
He's just lashing out. He's screaming, he's shouting obscenities, trying to wrestle away, he's trying to headbutt him, and it's taking a while for the police to arrive.
One of the guys is about to get hurt if somebody doesn't show up really fast. This is the crazy guy. He's going to hurt everybody. He's going to probably kill somebody. So we need help.
In the midst of the commotion, Brian never loosens his grip on the man, but he starts to worry.
It's only a matter of time till my grip gives out. Even though these moves, these physical moves are effective, you can't do something forever. It's only a matter of time till your muscle gives out. There are times where I actually look up and ask people in the crowd if they could call the police, and they tell me that they already did.
We're waiting for the police. We've been waiting for 10 minutes.
They're waiting for the police for so long, and the police are not here.
And the first thing that starts going numb was my left leg. So that's only a matter of time till I have to let go.
Brian can't see where the mother and her child have gone, but his reasons for wanting to protect them are personal.
I was involved in an incident where I got jumped in 2010. And when I got out of the hospital, I kind of just immersed myself in martial arts. And initially it was to protect myself. But later on, you learn that you can help others as well.
This is not out of character for him. There have been instances where we've been traveling together or we've seen a bar fight where he will step up to help somebody in need.
But this time, it seems Brian may not be able to save the day.
He's holding down this perpetrator for over 15 minutes, which is an eternity when you're trying to hold someone down who doesn't want to be held down.
Finally, after 17 minutes, park rangers show up to help subdue the man. And 30 minutes after the frightening attack first begins, police arrive and put the agitated attacker in an ambulance.
I don't know why he wanted to take the baby, but it was definitely very clear that he was not all the way there. Someone like this needs treatment, needs help.
With the situation now under police control, Brian walks away.
As I leave, the crowd starts clapping. And that was the moment when I felt like I did something good.
As Brian comes up to me, he's trembling, he's shaking.
And first thing my girlfriend says to me is, "Where were you? Where you been?" I'm actually limping because my right leg got hyperextended because of the weight that was on it.
We find out that he has subdued a potential kidnapping. I definitely thought about all the ways this could have gone wrong. The mob mentality, if someone had a weapon, who knows who could have gotten hurt.
What Brian didn't know is that after he stepped in to help, the terrified mother made a break for it with her baby and dialed 911.
Just like grabbed onto my stroller and said, "This is my son, why are you taking him?" And he got really violent. I think he's hallucinating. Are you injured? No, I'm just scared.
People start referring to this young man as a hero, and he truly is the definition of a hero. He put his own safety at risk for someone he didn't even know.
A Good Samaritan is speaking out tonight about how he used jiu-jitsu to take down a man who's accused of trying to steal a baby.
A New Yorker is being praised for using his training in martial arts to stop an alleged attempted kidnapping.
The press requests were coming from all over the world, from China to Mexico to the UK. It seemed just about everywhere.
33-year-old Kemsley was in Madison Square Park when he heard screaming.
Telling everyone it was his baby.
I got him to the ground.
Where's your cape and your Superman shirt?
I think it's funny to hear things joking that Brian's a superhero, but he really is very brave.
Brian is modest about what he did and says he doesn't feel like a hero.
The bar for being a hero should not be set this low. When you hear a woman screaming and see a man trying to take a baby away from a woman, everyone should jump in.
And of all the attention he got after the video of the incident went viral, it was one letter that touched him most.
So 2 months later, the mother wrote me an email. I needed some time to digest the shock. I do pass the park multiple times every single day, so there isn't a day where I don't thank you. It was very brave and kind of you to help a random stranger, and it really warmed my heart and reinforced my faith that people are genuinely good.
The man who tried to take the woman's child was never publicly identified. After a mental health evaluation, he was deemed unable to care for himself, and no charges were filed.
Wherever he is, I just hope he gets the treatment he needs. My takeaway from this situation is that when something like this happens, you don't have to react violently. It is still possible to get through it all with the mother, the child, the crowd, the suspect, and myself, all unharmed.
In South Africa, another man faces the same situation as Brian when a child is snatched right out of her chair. September 10th, 2020. Johannesburg, South Africa. It's a beautiful day, and Dishal Suku is sitting with his father on the patio of his new pizzeria, De La Casa.
De La Casa means in my home. It's a very family-oriented restaurant, giving customers that warm family experience. So it was around 4:35 p.m. in the afternoon. The restaurant was fairly busy.
As security cameras show, the crowd includes a mother and her 2 daughters.
They just came out for the evening to have a pizza and some milkshakes.
With his customers busy eating, Dishal sits back down with his dad, but then notices something suspicious.
We just saw a guy outside. He was making a bit of noise. He turned towards the restaurant and he just started running. I jumped up immediately. What is this guy trying to do?
You see this man running up to the restaurant. It looks like he's trying to rob the place.
My initial thought was, he's going for a cell phone or a handbag, something you could just grab and run away. But as he jumped over, he ran straight for this child.
It is terrifying. In broad daylight, a stranger is trying to take this mother's child. Horrified, she leaps over the table in a desperate attempt to save her.
This is a mother's worst nightmare. To see her child in sheer terror, to see a stranger literally ripping her child away from her in the middle of a restaurant, in the middle of the day.
It's the mother's instinct to jump and get her out of harm's way. But the man grabs the child by the neck and tries to lift her out of the chair.
Everyone in the restaurant panics.
It happened so fast. You don't know, is he gonna jump in with a gun, with a knife? What is he gonna do? It was quite a shock. Tables flew, glass broke. It's a scary situation.
He is brutal, brazen, and desperate.
Having boys of my own, if somebody had to take your child away or kidnap, you can't describe what would go through your mind.
But nothing is stopping this man. He refuses to let go of the girl.
We don't know what his intentions are. Has he been stalking this child? Does he have ties to child trafficking, to organized crime? We don't know. We do know that he wants this child and he is determined to take her.
The frantic mother pleads for help.
She's thinking, I've got to protect my baby. I don't care if I have to give my own life. This man is not going to take my child from me.
And that's when Dishal decides he has to do something.
Because it was a little girl, instinct came alive in me. I had to do something to just save this child.
In the blink of an eye, Dishal races over to the would-be kidnapper, putting him in a rear hold, a move commonly used in martial arts.
You're in the back of the opponent, you get control of him, you can see what he's doing, he can't see what you're doing. That's what makes it a very effective movie. But he did put up a fight because he was pretty strong.
Still, the man is no match for Dishal's martial arts training.
I've got a black belt in traditional jiu-jitsu. The whole point of doing martial arts is that you can use it when it's needed. And in this situation, it was a perfect opportunity to use something that I've learned all these years. It was to control him, pin him down.
In jiu-jitsu, the practice is to use your opponent's force against them, and that's exactly what Dishal does.
He takes this guy down and pins him. And this is a big guy, but this restaurant owner, he knows what he's doing.
When I get that lock really in, I held him for 40 to 50 seconds.
Luckily, security guards patrolling the nearby shopping center see the attack and run over to help.
They were the first one in the scene. They radioed or called in the police. They pulled me off from him and handcuffed him, and the community police arrived.
The mother, who has been watching helplessly, clings to her child as bystanders rush them away from the scene. Police take the screaming suspect outside and identify him as Naseem Slimane. He offers no explanation for his actions, but it turns out he's a wanted man with a record of petty theft.
But we don't know if this is the first time that this perpetrator tried to abduct a child. We don't know if this person has stalked others. We don't know if he's harassed others. It's likely that there are more things that we don't know about him.
Once the perpetrator was detained, I went to see the family and see the mom and see the child. The child was traumatized. She couldn't stop crying. We tried to console her as much as we could. Being in that mom's shoes, I can only imagine the trauma that she and the child experienced. It's going to be part of them for a very, very long time.
By the next day, the disturbing video has gone viral.
The public is reminded to remain vigilant. A recent video making the rounds on social media horrifically depicts this.
And Dishal is hailed as a hero.
It was quite a shock and a surprise to me that the video had gone out and gone as viral as it did. I just started receiving these calls and these messages and emails, and everyone just asking me what's happening.
After police review the security footage, Slimane is charged with assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm and attempted kidnapping. But it's the chilling thought of what could have happened that haunts witnesses.
It takes milliseconds for something like that to happen. If you don't react as fast as you have to react, you never know where the child could have been today.
If he got away with this child could have been sexually abused, could have been sold into child trafficking. You think about the worst case scenario that could have happened to this child if he got away with her.
She probably would have not even been in South Africa.
To this day, people think of Dishal as a hero.
When someone decides to be a good Samaritan, they are putting their own life on the line. They are knowingly saying, I may die, but I'm going to help this other person.
But he's humble about all the attention.
For me, it's just human nature to help another human. You risk your life to save someone's life.
And the best reward for Dishal? The mother is so grateful to him, she and her children are still regular customers.
At least once a month, they come into the restaurant, sit down, have a meal, and I get to chat to them. We become more as friends long term than just a customer. I'm just glad I could have done what I did just to help her. I'm no hero, I'm just a normal South African doing his day-to-day duties. If something like that had to happen to my kid, I would hope that somebody would have done what I done in that situation.
Get out of the vehicle.
A tense confrontation escalates into a dangerous standoff.
She's completely out of control.
She was running her vehicle into everything around her. My heart's racing. I was scared.
She was desperate, even if it meant taking his life.
Where are the police?
And later, another shocking assault on the street.
Terrifying attack on a driver. They turned their bikes into weapons. They're relentless. They keep coming after them.
This is highly traumatizing.
My mom was crying, screaming to the 911 operator, "We're gonna die."
You can file this and you have to see it to believe it category.
Please move your car, please, sir.
Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019, Lake Elsinore, California. A young woman slams into another car on the highway. The grandmother and grandson inside aren't injured, but the offending driver doesn't stick around to find that out. She just takes off. A passing motorist is so upset by this, he chases after the escaping driver.
She's trying to get away as fast as she possibly could, which was also endangering everyone else. She did not seem like she's in her right mind at all.
Justin catches up with her at a traffic stop and persuades her to pull over.
She pulled into the gas station. She drove straight ahead into a area where you can vacuum your vehicle. There's curbs on each side of her. So she's in essence trapped. I pulled in behind her, not very close.
Justin gets out of his car and tries to reason with the young woman, pleading with her to give herself up and wait for the police.
And then I started to record because I realized that she was completely out of control. She started to speak out. She was trying to get away. She kept hitting the guardrail with her car and hitting it, running over the curb onto the sidewalk.
Justin is determined to hold the angry driver accountable for her actions.
This is the last chance.
The human brain is wired to really get very angry when you see injustice. And so for some people, they just have that moral compass. They can't let things go. They have to see crimes being brought to justice.
But this woman has no interest in listening to Justin.
So once she stops, she quickly realizes this is not the guy she initially hit, so he's not going to hold her accountable. Who is he?
The woman is focused only on one thing, doing whatever it takes to get away.
And eventually, her fender fell off. She was very desperate. She regretted pulling over, and then she realized she put herself in a situation where she couldn't easily leave.
I already ran!
What she was trying to get me to do was feel sorry for her. Kept telling me that she was sorry and she had to leave right now. She kept telling me that I didn't understand.
You guys don't understand how mean my grandma is.
It's possible that she thought that this was the last straw for her in her household.
She's pulling on his heartstrings. Bottom line is, that's not an excuse to flee like this.
I would have thought that she would have been more concerned about going to jail than about how mean or upset her grandma's gonna be. Maybe her grandma is that mean, I'm not sure.
The woman's frantic behavior makes Justin increasingly concerned.
I understand that people in a situation like that can get nervous or panicky, but she was almost like in a confused or delusional state where she would walk towards one way and then walk to the other way. I felt like she was either under the control of some type of substance or there was something that wasn't right.
A lot of hit and run drivers have multiple offenses, are under the influence. They got to get out of there or else they could go to jail or they could lose their license. She's so desperate that she'll do whatever it takes.
And then the woman slams into Justin's car.
Hit and run. Hit my car. Double felony. Get out of the vehicle.
She was so desperate to get away that she hit his car. And then she gets out of the car. So she may have been desperate enough to get violent with him so that she could get away.
I was recording. I was scared that I didn't know what she would do. I started to back up at that point because I didn't know if she was going to be running at me.
But it turns out that all she wants is to retrieve some incriminating evidence.
I thought it was you and I pulled over.
It was definitely mind-boggling. She was walking back towards her car, and I'm thinking, why are you holding your bumper? And she's like trying to jam this bumper in by still yelling. All these people are around looking at us. It was very bizarre, but she managed to fit the bumper in.
Part of not getting caught is taking away the evidence.
As freaked out and as panicked as this woman is, she has the wherewithal to pick up her bumper. It's to a point where she can barely see out the window. Very, very strange.
Whatever it is, this hit-and-run driver is not about to back down.
Please move your car, please, sir.
You need to get out of the vehicle and do what's right.
She's literally put herself between a rock and a hard place. She's willing to destroy her own vehicle to gain her freedom.
Her grill was smashed so you could see exposed into her radiator area. Her hood was buckled and there was steam coming out. She also broke off one of her mirrors.
You need to get out of the vehicle. I have video documentation.
She's destroyed the front bumper of her car, and now she's beginning to destroy the property of this gas station. At one point, she smashes into the air pumps on the passenger side of the vehicle. It's a big, ugly situation.
Where are the police?
As the crazed driver continues to try and make her getaway, a stunned bystander calls 911.
911, what's your emergency?
At that moment, I was terrified. I was afraid of having injury to myself, having more damage done to my vehicle.
She's pulling up, she's backing up, she's angling her car in odd directions.
She was running her vehicle into everything around her.
Then things get really frightening. Suddenly, the woman puts her car in reverse, gets briefly stuck on the curb, and then slams on the gas.
Are you kidding me? You almost hit me.
I heard that acceleration sound. Once she cleared that curb, her vehicle shot towards me. And I had to jump back. My heart's racing. I'm confused. If I would have stayed in the position, I would have definitely been run over.
She almost hit him with her car. She was clearly desperate to get away, even if it meant taking his life.
This woman knew that she was being filmed. It probably just amplified her own sense of panic, her own sense of fear.
In her mind, she is convinced that getting away is better than getting caught.
Justin is stunned by the woman's reckless behavior.
Are you kidding me? You almost hit me.
It was only going to make things worse for her.
Incredibly, the woman manages to drive away before police show up. Shaken, Justin goes home and shares the wild video he has recorded with some family members.
My mother-in-law, I just sent her the video and I said, here's day in the life of Justin. She said, this is crazy. Can I put it on Facebook? I assumed that what she meant was she's going to put it on her Facebook page. Well, no, she put it on a group called What's Up Lake Elsinore.
The video goes viral in a matter of minutes, getting the most comments the page has ever gotten in an hour. And within days, it's worldwide news.
Parking lot crash course caught on camera.
Hit and run, hit my car, double felony, get out of the vehicle.
Erupted like crazy.
This video got a lot of attention because you have two people who are so stubborn. One who's really stubborn in getting away, and one who's really stubborn in capturing someone. So this cat-and-mouse game has really gone viral.
The video also catches the attention of law enforcement. And with the woman's license plate clearly visible, they begin looking for her.
The detective did not request the video. He explained to me that he had already seen it. The police were taking full statements from the two people in the car that she hit.
Social media sleuths also want to know who she is. And within 48 hours, someone posts a picture of what looks to be her car parked on a residential street. Neighbors say they know exactly who she is. And dashcam footage surfaces of another California highway accident from 2 years earlier, which appears to show the very same woman walking away from the scene.
It seems like she's completely out of control.
On October 31st, 1 week after Justin films her, 22-year-old Riley Ann Seebach is arrested for hit-and-run driving and ordered to participate in drug rehab. She is widely attacked on social media for her reckless behavior. And to his shock, even Justin, who was just trying to do the right thing, becomes a target of some of the comments.
I was called a kidnapper. I was called an intimidator. I was called a bully, an instigator. Trying to keep up with that was just insane.
We can sort of relate with this woman. We've all, at some point, been boxed in. We felt trapped.
I already ran.
We could debate all day the ethics, the merits of what this guy did by blocking this woman in.
Please move your car, please, sir.
You need to get out of the vehicle and do what's right.
But he kept a very panicked, very aggressive person off the road, at least in that moment, and maybe he spared someone's life because she could have been in a car wreck later on.
With every step he took to stop her, she became more and more aggressive and violent. She could have actually hurt more people.
Justin is just glad things didn't get worse and says he hopes the driver never does it again.
I am proud of what I did. She would have just ended up getting away.
In New York, another violent attack has a driver and his mother in fear for their lives.
Begin with a terrifying attack on a driver in Midtown.
Tuesday, December 29th, 2020, New York City, 4 p.m. 36-year-old Max Torgovnik and his mother are driving to his father's office after dropping off donations at a thrift store.
After 30 years of being a doctor in the city, he was retiring. We were driving back to pick him up to go for a celebratory dinner.
But on the corner of 22nd Street and 5th Avenue, their afternoon turns into a nightmare.
We stopped at a red light, and as the light's turning green, I see in the rearview mirror a mob of cyclists. Dozens and dozens of kids on bikes just weaving through traffic, taking over the streets. As I started to accelerate, I realized that they were quickly surrounding the car.
In the passenger seat, Max's startled mom starts yelling.
My mom screamed out, "They're holding on to the door handle."
Are they trying to hitch a ride? Whatever is going on, this is dangerous.
I was only probably going about 10 miles an hour, but I realized if they keep holding on, someone could get pulled under the wheel.
Out of caution, Max slowly stops his car, but to his dismay, that causes an accident.
There's a kid doing a wheelie right behind the car. He just crashed right into the back and fell to the ground and got a bloody lip.
Max wants to jump out to check on the kid, but the pack of cyclists make that impossible.
They all just jumped off their bikes. At least a dozen of them started surrounding the car. I just keep trying to gesture to them, "It's okay, calm down, we will sort it out. I'm not going anywhere."
This group of teenagers totally flip out, start yelling at him to get out of his car. This motorist is not having it. He stays put wisely, and that's when all hell breaks loose.
The cyclists are screaming at Max and seem to be in a rage.
Suddenly, all this anger is being directed towards me. Roll down the windows, get out of the car, get out of the car. Once they realized that I was not getting out of the vehicle, they started punching the glass.
This is a moment of total and complete rage.
The cyclists appear to be mocking Max for staying inside his car.
They view it as weakness, almost like a turtle going inside his shell, and they come after him.
Max and his mother are terrified. They are now under full attack.
They started trying to rip the door open from the seams of the door, pulling on the door handles, trying to force it open. They then started ripping apart the car piece by piece. The side mirrors were torn off pretty quickly. The grille was ripped to shreds.
They take it to the next level. They turn their bikes into weapons.
lifting up their bicycles and slamming them down on the car.
There's real hatred going on right now.
We are terrified for our lives.
Max is too afraid to try and drive away because he doesn't want to hit anyone else. So both he and his mom frantically dial 911.
911, what's your emergency?
The fact that both of them are on the phone with 911 at the same time says a lot.
My mom, a little bit more hysterical than me. She was unable to even describe where we were, let alone really what is happening to us.
These kids can see that the two people inside are on their phones talking to 911, but that doesn't stop them at all. They're relentless. They keep coming after them.
This is highly traumatizing. If the mob's mentality was that we're gonna destroy, and we sense that we're not gonna have any repercussions and this person is not gonna be violent back towards us, then that further fuels their fire.
I was in shock. Biggest concern I had in that moment was the safety of me and my mom.
Even the sound of the attack is horrifying.
You could feel it reverberate throughout the entire vehicle. And every time they punched the glass, every time they kicked the door, every time they lifted up the bike and slammed it, we just felt the impact.
This is now bike versus car on the streets of Manhattan.
And the violence only keeps escalating.
This is a total frenzy. We're past the point of reason.
They start to jump on top of this car. They're demanding that this guy gets out, and they're gonna use their own bodies against this car to get what they want.
I am really shocked no one broke a bone.
Fearing they may have weapons, Max keeps his eyes glued to every one of the angry cyclists.
I am looking left, I'm looking right. I'm looking for something out of the ordinary and not just a fist or a bike hitting the car.
But it's what happens next that really shakes him. The mob of cyclists is now right on top of the car, and Max is frozen in fear.
As they started jumping onto the car, I thought we need to get away from this. At the same time, I realized that if they're on the car and I accelerate, then they're going to go flying off the car and they are going to get severely injured.
The last thing this guy wants is to run over one of these kids. But at this point, things have gotten really, really personal. This is no longer about the car, and it's about the people inside.
The situation is escalating, and what they do next is horrifying.
One of these kids jumps on the windshield, and the windshield shatters.
It felt like the roof collapsed. The rearview mirror dropped about half a foot. Glass started flying into our faces. It went everywhere. Could barely see. I just feared for what would happen next. We are hearing them screaming, yelling, having fun. My mom was crying, screaming to the 911 operator, "We're gonna die. They're gonna kill us. Please send help."
But nobody in the crowd tries to stop the attack.
It was shocking. Dozens and dozens of people on the street, they're videotaping. Some of them called 911, but people are standing around instead of actually trying to intervene. We felt like, animals in a zoo or fish in an aquarium.
This is a helpless situation, but no one is stepping in.
Just like there's the mob mentality, there's also the bystander effect. If people are around and they're seeing no one else intervening first, then they're likely to not intervene as well. So it's really terrifying.
But with his mom in a complete panic, Max has had enough.
Once they broke that glass and I heard her scream, I had to act. And as soon as I saw an opening, I took it.
He drives away to get out of the onslaught and escape the situation.
The best thing they could do is get away.
Shaking, Max carefully steers his battered SUV away from the crowd as they continue to mock him.
Those kids were literally cheering, laughing, giving us the finger as they're riding their bikes past us.
As Max waits for the police, he tries to comfort his mom.
She was crying hysterically. She's in her 70s. She could have very well had a heart attack in that moment. There were so many things that could have happened. I'm so grateful that it didn't.
When police arrive, the cyclists have already fled the scene. The wild video taken by bystanders goes viral within minutes.
I never in my life imagined that I would be the victim of a crime that went viral. The posts that I saw online, many people said, "You did the right thing."
But some of the comments seem as hateful as the attack itself.
The hardest ones to read were the ones who said that I deserve that.
It could have happened to anyone. The idea that this guy deserved it is completely insane.
This was anger, causing trouble and causing chaos.
Police soon determined that this is the same mob of cyclists who attacked a cab driver just minutes before they went after Max and his mom.
We have new information tonight about a group of teenagers on bikes attacking an SUV in Manhattan. It appears they also went after a cab driver.
And that he had unfortunately gotten out of the car and fallen victim to a brutal assault, where they were kicking, punching, and lifting their bikes and crashing them down on top of his body.
3 days later, on New Year's Day 2021, police arrest 2 teens in connection with the attacks. They're charged with felony mischief and rioting. Other arrests soon follow. But because all of the suspects are juveniles, the penalties are mild.
Many of these cyclists were caught, but because they're juveniles, they're not going to be fully prosecuted.
The car, which belongs to Max's dad, sustained some $20,000 in damage. And the trauma of that day still lingers.
My mom and I still have residual effects to this day. Definitely PTSD.
But Max is grateful it wasn't worse, and that he was able to protect his mom.
My concern was that nobody got hurt. I tried to care for the people outside that vehicle at first, and then I had to care for the people inside the vehicle. Me, my mother, my family.
Walter Tabajai had spent years studying violence, but on the morning of May 28, 1980, violence came looking for him. Just before 11 o'clock, on Via Saleno in Milan, the 33-year-old political journalist stepped out of his home as he had done countless times before. There was nothing unusual about the beginning of that day. The street was familiar. The route ahead was routine. For neighbors and passers-by, it was another ordinary late spring morning in one of Italy's busiest cities. Yet hidden within that ordinary moment was a carefully prepared ambush. Waiting nearby was a small group of young extremists who had spent weeks learning his movements, memorizing his schedule, and choosing the exact place where they intended to strike. Within seconds, the silence of the street was shattered by gunfire. Multiple shots rang out in rapid succession. Walter Tabajai collapsed onto the pavement after being struck several times. According to the subsequent examination, one bullet pierced his heart and proved fatal. After he had already fallen, another shot was fired at extremely close range behind his left ear. The attack was swift, deliberate, and merciless. By the time the echoes of the gunfire faded, one of Italy's most respected journalists lay dead in the street, killed simply for the work he had chosen to do. His assassination shocked Milan almost instantly, but the impact extended far beyond the city. Across Italy, newsrooms, government offices, universities, and ordinary households all confronted the same disturbing question. Why had a journalist become the next target? Walter Tabajai was not a judge issuing controversial rulings. He was not a police commander directing anti-terror operations. He was not a cabinet minister or a prominent political leader. His weapon had never been a firearm. It had been a notebook, careful research, and an unwavering commitment to understanding the forces reshaping his country. Yet in an Italy already scarred by years of political bloodshed, those tools have become dangerous enough to warrant an execution. This is not merely the story of a murder. It is the story of an era in which words were considered as threatening as weapons, where reporting facts could carry the same risks as enforcing the law, and where the search for truth could place a journalist directly in the sights of those determined to silence dissent. To understand why Walter Tabajai died, it is necessary to understand the country in which he lived. During the late 1970s, Italy was experiencing one of the darkest chapters in its modern history, a period remembered as the years of Lead, or Anni di Piombo. It was an era defined by political extremism, ideological confrontation, and relentless acts of terrorism. Assassinations, bombings, kidnappings, and armed attacks had become frighteningly familiar headlines. Public life unfolded beneath a constant sense of uncertainty. Citizens woke each morning not knowing what violent event might dominate the evening news. The targets were diverse. Politicians were attacked for representing the state. Judges were murdered for enforcing the law. Police officers became symbols of governmental authority. Business leaders were portrayed as enemies of revolutionary movements. Increasingly, journalists also found themselves under threat, especially those who attempted to investigate and explain the organizations responsible for the violence. Reporting on terrorism was no longer simply a professional assignment. It had become an act of personal risk. Among the organizations operating during those years were the Red Brigades, Prima Linea, and a smaller but determined group known as Brigata XXVI Marzo. Each believed violence could reshape Italian society. Each justified murder through ideology. Each viewed certain individuals not merely as opponents, but as obstacles that had to be removed. Walter Tabajai devoted much of his professional life to studying precisely these movements. Unlike many observers who focused only on the attacks themselves, he sought to understand the people behind them. His reporting examined not only what terrorist organizations did, but why they existed, how they evolved, and how they justified violence in the name of political change. His work avoided sensationalism. Instead, it relied on analysis, careful observation, and an effort to explain complicated realities to the public. Ironically, that commitment to understanding extremism ultimately made him one of its targets. His articles challenged the image many terrorist organizations attempted to project, rather than portraying them as authentic representatives of the working class. Tabajai argued that many militants came from educated or financially comfortable backgrounds. He questioned the growing gap between revolutionary rhetoric and reality. He observed that violence itself had increasingly become the objective, replacing meaningful political struggle. Such conclusions struck at the identity these organizations wished to preserve. In their eyes, Walter Tabajai was no longer simply a journalist. He became someone whose words threatened their legitimacy. He exposed contradictions they preferred to keep hidden. He analyzed structures they wished to keep secret. He described motivations they believed outsiders should never fully understand. As a result, some extremists came to regard him not as an observer, but as an enemy. 2 years before Tabajai's death, another event had profoundly transformed Italy's political landscape. In 1978, former Prime Minister Aldo Moro had been kidnapped and murdered, a crime that traumatized the nation and demonstrated how far political violence had escalated. After that killing, the atmosphere changed even further. Individuals who publicly opposed terrorism, whether through politics, law enforcement, or journalism, increasingly found themselves facing heightened danger. The message delivered by extremist organizations was unmistakable. No public figure who challenged them could consider themselves entirely safe. Walter Tabajai understood this environment better than most. His profession required him to study its evolution daily. Every article demanded that he confront the realities of political violence without surrendering to fear or abandoning factual reporting. Yet understanding danger does not eliminate it. The closer he came to explaining terrorism, the more visible he became to those who believed explanation itself constituted opposition. The tragedy that unfolded on Via Saleno, therefore, did not emerge from a random encounter or a spontaneous act of violence. According to the investigation that followed, the attack had been carefully planned. The men responsible had observed Tabajai for weeks. They knew when he left home. They knew the route he regularly followed. They knew where to wait. Their preparation reflected patience rather than impulse, calculation rather than chaos. Every ordinary habit of Walter Tabajai's daily life had gradually become information collected for the purpose of murder. Perhaps the most haunting detail emerged from the evening before the assassination. Walter Tabajai attended a discussion devoted to press freedom, an issue that had become increasingly urgent in a country where journalists worked under growing pressure. During that discussion, he reportedly remarked with sadness that he did not know who would be next. It was a simple observation, reflecting the climate of uncertainty surrounding Italy at the time. There is no indication that he believed the next victim would be himself. Yet roughly 10 hours later, his words acquired a devastating significance. The uncertainty he had described disappeared, replaced by a tragic certainty that would forever associate his name with the dangers confronting journalists during the years of lead. The murder of Walter Tabajai would eventually lead investigators toward a newly formed terrorist organization, expose surprising truths about its members, and ignite public debate over justice, accountability, and the price of cooperation with investigators. It would raise difficult questions about whether warning signs had been overlooked before the assassination and whether the state had possessed information that might have prevented the attack. Even decades later, discussions surrounding the case would continue, not because the identity of the killers remained unknown, but because the murder symbolized something much larger than a single criminal act. It represented the collision between free inquiry and violent extremism, between the pursuit of truth and those who believed truth itself could be eliminated through fear. Before examining the investigation, the arrests, and the controversial courtroom proceedings that followed, it is essential to understand the man whose life ended on that Milan street. Walter Tabajai was far more than the final victim in a long list of political assassinations. He was a journalist whose career reflected an enduring belief that understanding violence was one of the first steps toward resisting it. That belief would define both his professional legacy and the reason he became a target. His story begins not with the gunfire that ended his life, but with the principles that shaped it, the work that earned him respect across Italian journalism, and the increasingly dangerous environment in which he chose to keep asking difficult questions. In the years that followed, his name would become inseparable from the struggle for press freedom in modern Italy. Remembered not because he sought conflict, but because he refused to look away from it. Walter Tabajai was born on March 18, 1947, and came of age during a period when Italy was experiencing profound political, social, and cultural transformation. By the time he established himself as a political journalist, the nation had become increasingly divided by ideological conflict. Public debate was no longer confined to parliamentary chambers, newspaper editorials, or university lecture halls. Political disagreements were spilling into the streets, and extremist organizations on both sides of the ideological spectrum believed violence could accomplish what democratic institutions could not. Against this backdrop, Tabajai built a career defined not by sensational headlines or dramatic personal opinions, but by careful reporting and thoughtful analysis. He became a political journalist for Corriere della Sera, one of Italy's most respected newspapers, earning recognition for his disciplined approach to investigating some of the country's most dangerous subjects. Rather than focusing solely on the immediate consequences of terrorist attacks, he devoted considerable effort to understanding the organizations responsible for them. His reporting reflected a belief that terrorism could not be confronted effectively without first being understood. This commitment distinguished him from many observers of the period. While violence naturally attracted public attention, Tabajai consistently looked beyond the explosions, kidnappings, and assassinations to examine the ideas, structures, and motivations that sustained extremist movements. His articles did not glorify terrorism or reduce it to simple slogans. Instead, they sought to explain how these organizations developed, how they recruited members, and how their ideology evolved over time. This analytical approach earned him respect among colleagues and readers alike. He was known as a journalist who approached politically sensitive issues with moderation, precision, and intellectual honesty. He opposed political violence without abandoning his commitment to objective reporting, recognizing that the role of journalism was not merely to condemn events, but to provide the public with a deeper understanding of the forces shaping their society. That commitment would ultimately place him in extraordinary danger. As the years progressed, Walter Tabajai became increasingly recognized for his investigations into left-wing terrorist organizations operating throughout Italy. He examined their internal structures, their public declarations, and the contradictions that emerged between their revolutionary rhetoric and their actual behavior. One of his most significant observations challenged the image many extremist groups sought to cultivate. These organizations often portrayed themselves as authentic representatives of the working class, claiming to speak on behalf of ordinary laborers against political and economic elites. Tabajai's reporting, however, pointed toward a different reality. Through careful analysis, he argued that many members of these organizations no longer reflected the social class they claimed to defend. Instead, numerous militants came from educated, middle-class, or even affluent families. Many possessed university educations and had grown up in relatively comfortable environments. This conclusion undermined one of the central narratives promoted by extremist movements. Rather than depicting them as a spontaneous uprising of oppressed workers, Tabajai suggested that their composition revealed a far more complicated social reality. His reporting also questioned whether violence remained a means to achieve political objectives, or whether it had gradually become an objective in itself. He observed that many organizations appeared increasingly committed to armed struggle regardless of whether such actions advanced meaningful political change. In his analysis, terrorism had evolved beyond strategic political action into an ideology centered on violence as its own justification. Such conclusions challenged the moral and political legitimacy that these groups attempted to project for organizations determined to maintain their revolutionary image. A journalist exposing these contradictions represented more than a critical observer. He became someone capable of weakening their influence through facts rather than force. While Tabajai maintained a moderate political outlook, his moderation should never be mistaken for neutrality toward violence. He consistently rejected terrorism as a legitimate instrument of political expression. His opposition, however, remained grounded in evidence and careful reasoning rather than emotional rhetoric. This balance allowed his work to retain credibility even while addressing some of Italy's most divisive issues. Readers trusted that his conclusions emerged from investigation rather than ideology. Ironically, this credibility also increased the impact of his reporting. When Walter Tabajai described extremist organizations, his words carried weight because they reflected detailed research instead of political propaganda. That influence made him increasingly visible within the very movements he was studying. To understand why his journalism became so significant, it is necessary to appreciate the extraordinary climate in which he worked. By the late 1970s, Italy had entered one of the most turbulent periods in its post-war history. This era, later remembered as the Years of Lead, was characterized by persistent political violence that affected nearly every aspect of public life. Bombings, kidnappings, assassinations, and armed confrontations became recurring features of the national conversation. Citizens learned to live with uncertainty. Every new attack reinforced the sense that no institution was entirely secure. Political extremism transformed daily life in ways that reached far beyond the immediate victims of violence. Fear became a constant presence, influencing public debate, security policies, and personal behavior. The targets selected by terrorist organizations reflected their broader political objectives. Politicians became symbols of the democratic system these groups sought to overthrow. Judges represented the authority of the legal system. Police officers embodied state power. Business leaders were portrayed as representatives of economic structures the extremists opposed. Journalists, meanwhile, occupied a unique position. They shaped public understanding of events, investigated clandestine organizations, and challenged narratives promoted by violent groups. As terrorism intensified, reporting itself became increasingly dangerous. Those who examined extremist movements too closely risked attracting unwanted attention from the very individuals they sought to understand. Among the organizations operating during this period were the Red Brigades, Prima Linea, and Brigata 20 Marzo. Each embraced political violence, although they differed in size, organization, and methods. Collectively, they contributed to an atmosphere in which ideological conflict regularly produced bloodshed. Their attacks demonstrated that violence could reach virtually anyone considered an obstacle to revolutionary ambitions. The murder of former Prime Minister Aldo Moro in 1978 profoundly intensified this atmosphere. His kidnapping and subsequent killing shocked the nation, revealing that even one of Italy's most prominent political figures could become the victim of extremist violence. The psychological impact extended far beyond politics. Many Italians realized that terrorism had entered a new and deeply alarming phase. Confidence in public security declined, while concern for journalists, judges, investigators, and other public figures increased significantly. After the Aldo Moro case, individuals who publicly opposed terrorist organizations became even more vulnerable. The message communicated by extremist groups was unmistakable. Criticism would not necessarily be answered with debate, but could instead be met with assassination. Walter Tabegiai continued his work despite this reality. His investigations remained focused on explaining the evolution of political violence rather than retreating from it. Every article represented a deliberate choice to confront difficult subjects that many others might have avoided. Rather than simplifying terrorism into a battle between heroes and villains, he attempted to illuminate the social and ideological mechanisms that allowed extremist organizations to persist. Yet this commitment inevitably drew attention from those who viewed analytical journalism as a direct threat. Tabegiai's work did not simply describe attacks after they occurred. It examined organizational structures, ideological inconsistencies, and the backgrounds of the individuals participating in political violence. Such reporting challenged carefully constructed revolutionary identities. If readers came to understand that many militants originated from educated or affluent families rather than the impoverished working class, the organization's claims to represent popular struggle became less convincing. Facts, presented calmly and methodically, possessed the power to undermine myths that extremist movements relied upon for legitimacy. For this reason, Walter Tabegiai gradually came to be regarded by some members of the radical left not merely as a journalist covering terrorism, but as an adversary actively weakening their cause. The distinction between observation and opposition disappeared in the eyes of those committed to ideological violence. Instead of viewing his investigations as legitimate journalism, they interpreted them as attacks upon the movement itself. In such an environment, objective reporting became increasingly dangerous precisely because it resisted propaganda from every direction. Walter Tabegiai's professional reputation continued to grow, but so too did the risks surrounding his work. Unknown to him, Individuals within a newly formed extremist organization were beginning to regard his reporting with growing hostility. They believed his analyses exposed weaknesses they preferred to conceal. They interpreted his examination of their social backgrounds as an attempt to delegitimize their revolutionary identity. Rather than answering his arguments through public debate, they would eventually choose a far more violent response. The path toward assassination did not begin with a single article or a single investigation. It emerged gradually as the broader political climate of Italy encouraged extremist organizations to identify perceived enemies beyond traditional institutions of government. In a country where violence increasingly replaced dialogue, even a journalist dedicated to careful analysis could be transformed into a target. Walter Tabajai's commitment to understanding terrorism ultimately placed him among the very people whose lives were threatened by it. His reporting reflected courage, discipline, and intellectual integrity. But those qualities alone could not protect him from individuals who believed truth itself was dangerous. As the years of lead grew darker, the distance between observer and participant steadily narrowed. Without carrying a weapon, wearing a uniform, or holding political office, Walter Tabajai found himself standing on the front line of one of Italy's most violent chapters simply because he refused to stop asking difficult questions. Unknown to him, while he continued pursuing facts, others had already begun watching his daily routine, memorizing his movements, and preparing a plan that would transform one ordinary morning in Milan into one of the defining tragedies of Italian journalism. The decision to kill Walter Tabajai was not made in a moment of anger or during an unexpected confrontation. According to the facts established after the investigation, the assassination was the result of careful preparation carried out by a small terrorist organization known as Brigata XXVI Marzo. Unlike larger extremist groups that had already become notorious throughout Italy, this organization had only recently been formed. Despite its relatively small size, it shared the same belief that political violence could be used as a legitimate instrument to reshape society. For its members, murder was not viewed as an act of personal hatred, but as a political statement. Walter Tabajai, through his reporting and analysis, had come to symbolize everything they believed should be silenced. His investigations into left-wing terrorism had challenged the image these organizations tried to present to the public. He had argued that many extremists no longer represented the working class they claimed to defend, and had pointed out that numerous militants came from educated or financially comfortable families. He also observed that violence itself had gradually become an objective rather than merely a means of political struggle. These conclusions struck directly at the identity the organizations attempted to preserve. Instead of responding through debate, the members of Brigata XXVI Marzo chose to respond through violence. The group responsible for the assassination consisted of young militants whose background surprised many Italians after their identities became known. The organization was led by Marco Barbone. Among the other members were Paolo Morandini, Mario Morano, Daniele Laus, Francesco Giordano, and Manfredi Di Stefano. One of the most shocking aspects revealed after the arrest was that many of these individuals did not fit the common stereotype of desperate or marginalized revolutionaries. According to the available information, several came from middle-class or wealthy families. They were well-educated, and some even had parents who were journalists, academics, or respected intellectual figures. The contrast between their privileged upbringing and the revolutionary image they attempted to project reflected precisely the contradiction Walter Tabajai had highlighted in his reporting. Ironically, the very observations that had made his journalism influential also helped explain why he became their target. Long before the fatal morning in Milan, the members of Brigata XXVI Marzo began preparing their attack with patience and discipline. They did not rely on chance. Instead, they conducted weeks of surveillance. During this period, they carefully observed Walter Tabajai's daily routine. They learned the time he usually left his home. They became familiar with the route he regularly followed on his way to work. They identified his residence in Milan and selected a location where they believed the attack could be carried out quickly before he had any opportunity to escape. Every ordinary habit in Tabajai's daily life gradually became information collected for the purpose of murder. The planning demonstrated that the assassination was intended to eliminate a carefully chosen target, rather than create random fear. It also illustrated the vulnerability faced by journalists during the years of lead. A predictable routine, something shared by almost everyone, could become a fatal weakness when observed by determined extremists. While the attackers prepared their operation, Walter Tabajai continued with his professional responsibilities. There is nothing in the available information suggesting that he altered his routine or attempted to withdraw from public life despite the increasingly dangerous political climate. On the evening before the assassination, he attended a discussion devoted to press freedom. The subject itself reflected one of the defining concerns of the period. Across Italy, journalists were working under growing pressure as terrorist organizations increasingly viewed the media as an enemy. During that discussion, Tabajai reportedly expressed a quiet concern by remarking that he did not know who would be next. It was a brief observation, spoken in the context of an era marked by repeated political assassinations. Whether it reflected professional anxiety, personal concern, or simply recognition of the violence surrounding Italian society, his words would acquire heartbreaking significance only hours later. Approximately 10 hours after making that remark, Walter Tabajai himself became the next victim. The morning of May 28, 1980, began like many others. There was no public indication that anything extraordinary was about to occur. Walter Tabajai prepared to leave his home on Via Saleno in Milan, following the routine that had become familiar to both himself and unknown to him, the individuals who had been monitoring his movements. At approximately 11 o'clock in the morning, he stepped outside and began making his way toward work. Waiting nearby were members of Brigata XXVI Marzo. They had chosen both the time and the location with care after weeks of observation. Their plan depended upon surprise, speed, and precision, according to the established facts of the case. The principal gunmen were Marco Barbone and Mario Morano. As Walter Tabajai left his home, the attackers approached. There was no opportunity for negotiation or escape. Without warning, they opened fire. Multiple gunshots shattered the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood. The attack unfolded within moments. Yet those few seconds permanently altered the lives of everyone connected to Walter Tabajai. The examination conducted afterward established the devastating consequences of the assault. Walter Tabajai was struck by multiple bullets. Among the wounds, one bullet passed through his heart, causing the fatal injury. As he collapsed onto the street, the violence did not immediately end. After he had already fallen, another shot was fired from extremely close range into the area behind his left ear. The final shot demonstrated the determination of the attackers to ensure that their target would not survive. The assault ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Walter Tabajai died on the street outside his home before help could save him. Witnesses saw the attack unfold in broad daylight, transforming an ordinary street in Milan into the scene of one of Italy's most significant political assassinations. The murder was not only an attack on an individual journalist, but also a direct assault on the principle of independent reporting during one of the country's darkest periods. News of the assassination spread rapidly throughout Milan and across Italy. For many journalists, the murder confirmed fears that had been growing for years. Reporting on terrorism no longer carried only professional risks. It had become a matter of personal survival. Walter Tabajai had devoted his career to explaining political violence with accuracy and restraint. He had never sought notoriety through sensationalism. Instead, he believed that careful investigation and factual analysis could help society understand the forces threatening democratic institutions. His killers rejected that belief completely. They answered journalism with bullets, replacing argument with execution. Behind the public shock lay an intensely personal tragedy. Walter Tabajai left behind his wife, Maristella, and their 2 young children. Among them was his daughter, Benedetta Tabajai, who would later become a writer and researcher dedicated to preserving the memory of those who had fallen victim to terrorism in Italy. While the assassination immediately became a national story discussed in newspapers and political circles, it also remained a family's devastating loss. A husband never returned home. A father disappeared from the lives of 2 children. Behind every headline describing political violence stood ordinary people forced to confront irreversible grief. The contrast between the attackers and their victim became increasingly striking. Walter Tabajai had spent years studying extremist organizations through journalism, believing that ideas should be examined openly and critically. The members of Brigada XXVI, Marzo, responded by eliminating the person asking difficult questions, rather than addressing the questions themselves. Their decision reflected the broader logic of terrorism during the years of Lead, where violence was intended not merely to remove individuals, but also to intimidate anyone else who might challenge extremist narratives. Yet the assassination achieved more than the killers intended. Instead of silencing discussion, it intensified public attention toward the dangers confronting journalists and reinforced national concern about political terrorism. As investigators secured the crime scene and began gathering evidence, Italy once again found itself confronting a familiar reality. Another public figure had been murdered. Another carefully planned political assassination demanded answers. The identity of the killers remained unknown to the wider public, but investigators immediately recognized that the attack bore the hallmarks of an organized extremist operation rather than an isolated act of violence. Every detail of the crime, from the weeks of surveillance to the carefully selected location and the coordinated execution, suggested preparation by individuals accustomed to clandestine activity. The search for those responsible began almost immediately. Under the leadership of Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, investigators launched an intensive inquiry aimed at identifying the members of the organization behind the murder. What initially appeared to be another difficult terrorism investigation would, within only a few months, take an unexpected turn. One of the men responsible for Walter Tabajai's death would eventually decide to cooperate with authorities, a decision that not only exposed Brigada XXVI Marzo, but also revealed information about broader extremist networks operating during the final years of Italy's long and violent period of political terrorism. The murder of Walter Tabajai sent an immediate shockwave through Italy. But once the first reports reached the authorities, emotion had to give way to method. The attack had taken place in broad daylight, on a public street in Milan, and the manner in which it had been carried out suggested neither spontaneity nor personal revenge. Everything about the assassination indicated preparation. The killers had known precisely when Walter Tabajai would leave his home. They had positioned themselves at the right location and attacked with remarkable speed before, disappearing almost as quickly as they had appeared. For investigators, those first observations were significant. They pointed away from an isolated criminal act and toward the organized methods that had become familiar during the years of Lead. The responsibility for directing the investigation fell to the Italian Carabinieri under the leadership of Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, one of the country's most experienced figures in the fight against political terrorism. By 1980, investigations involving extremist organizations demanded patience coordination, and careful analysis. Terrorist groups rarely operated as individuals. They relied upon clandestine structures, compartmentalized responsibilities, and strict secrecy. Solving such crimes required far more than identifying the people who pulled the trigger. Investigators had to determine how the operation had been organized, who had participated in planning, and whether the assassination formed part of a broader network of political violence. The crime scene itself immediately revealed several important facts. Walter Tebejai had been attacked within moments of leaving his residence, demonstrating that the killers possessed detailed knowledge of his routine. This was not information that could have been obtained by coincidence. It strongly suggested a period of prior observation. As investigators reconstructed the events leading up to the shooting, it became increasingly apparent that the attackers had conducted surveillance over an extended period. They had learned the time he usually left home, identified his normal route, and selected the precise moment when he would be most vulnerable. Every aspect of the operation reflected planning rather than impulse. This realization significantly shaped the direction of the inquiry. Instead of concentrating solely on the immediate participants, investigators began examining organizations capable of organizing such a carefully coordinated assassination. Walter Tebejai's professional work provided another important context for the investigation. Unlike victims targeted for personal reasons, Tebejai had devoted much of his career to analyzing left-wing terrorist organizations. His reporting had examined their ideology, organizational structures, and social composition. He had argued that many extremists no longer represented the working class they claimed to defend, and had observed that numerous militants originated from educated or financially comfortable backgrounds. He had also concluded that violence itself had increasingly become an end rather than merely a political instrument. These analyses had earned him professional respect, but they had also made him an increasingly visible critic in the eyes of certain extremist organizations. Investigators, therefore, had strong reason to consider that the motive for the murder lay directly within the world Walter Tebejai had spent years studying. Rather than searching for private conflicts or isolated disputes, the investigation focused upon organizations that had previously demonstrated both the willingness and the capability to assassinate perceived political enemies. Italy's recent history provided sobering precedent. Throughout the years of lead, extremist groups had repeatedly targeted politicians, judges, police officers, business leaders, and journalists. Walter Tebejai's assassination fit an established pattern of ideological violence designed to eliminate individuals considered obstacles to revolutionary objectives. Yet identifying a likely motive did not automatically identify the perpetrators. Investigators still faced the difficult task of determining exactly which organization had carried out the killing and who had participated in the operation. The inquiry progressed steadily over the weeks that followed. Evidence was collected, information was analyzed, and investigators gradually assembled a clearer picture of the organization responsible. Approximately 4 months after the assassination, the investigation reached its first decisive breakthrough. The principal suspects were identified and arrests followed. The organization responsible proved to be Brigata XXVI Marzo, a relatively new terrorist group that had nevertheless demonstrated its willingness to employ lethal violence. The arrest confirmed that the murder had indeed been carried out by an organized extremist cell, rather than by isolated individuals acting independently. Among those identified were Marco Barbone, the group's leader, together with other members including Paolo Morandini, Mario Morano, Daniele Laus, Francesco Giordano, and Manfredi Di Stefano. Their capture represented a significant achievement for investigators. particularly given the clandestine nature of terrorist organizations during that period. However, the investigation was about to take an unexpected turn that would reshape not only the Tebejai case, but also broader efforts to dismantle extremist networks throughout Italy. After his arrest, Marco Barbone made a decision that few had anticipated. Rather than maintaining silence or continuing to defend the organization, he chose to cooperate with investigators. This development transformed the direction of the inquiry almost immediately. Until that moment, investigators had relied primarily upon traditional methods of evidence collection and intelligence analysis. Barbone's cooperation suddenly provided access to information from inside the organization itself. His decision allowed authorities to move beyond reconstructing the assassination solely through external evidence. They could now compare the physical investigation with direct testimony from one of the people responsible for the crime. According to the available information, Barbone supplied details that enabled investigators not only to dismantle Brigata XXVI Marzo, but also to clarify aspects of broader extremist networks operating during the final years of the Years of Lead. His cooperation extended beyond admitting participation in Walter Tebejai's murder. It provided authorities with valuable insight into relationships among terrorist organizations and their activities. For investigators who had spent years confronting highly secretive extremist groups, such cooperation represented an extraordinary opportunity. It significantly accelerated efforts to identify additional participants and understand the internal structure of the organization responsible for the assassination. Yet this breakthrough also introduced new complexities. Cooperation by a leading participant in such a serious crime inevitably raised difficult legal and moral questions. While those issues would later dominate public discussion during the trial, investigators at this stage remained focused upon verifying the information received and ensuring that every statement corresponded with independently established facts. The investigation, therefore, became a process of careful confirmation rather than simple acceptance. Information supplied through cooperation had to be examined alongside the physical evidence and the broader chronology of events already established by the inquiry. The progress achieved during these months demonstrated the effectiveness of persistent investigative work under extremely challenging circumstances. Within only 4 months of the assassination, authorities had identified the responsible organization, arrested its members, and secured cooperation from its leader. For a country accustomed to prolonged terrorism investigations, this represented a significant accomplishment. Nevertheless, solving the immediate crime did not eliminate every question surrounding Walter Tebejai's death. As the investigation continued, additional issues emerged that would remain subjects of discussion long after the criminal responsibility for the murder had been established. One of the most persistent areas of controversy concerned indications that authorities may have received warnings before the assassination. According to later discussions surrounding the case, there were suggestions that information indicating a possible threat had existed prior to the attack. Questions were also raised regarding certain intelligence documents and whether they had been fully processed or acted upon before Walter Tebejai was killed. These concerns did not alter the established identification of Brigata XXVI Marzo as the organization responsible for the assassination, nor did they produce confirmed evidence demonstrating the existence of a broader conspiracy directing the murder from behind the scenes. Nevertheless, they contributed to continuing public debate about whether additional preventive measures might have been possible. Such discussions reflected the broader difficulties faced by Italian authorities during the years of lead. Intelligence agencies and law enforcement institutions operated under immense pressure while attempting to monitor numerous extremist organizations simultaneously, even where fragments of information existed. Transforming those fragments into timely preventive action proved extraordinarily difficult. In Walter Tabajai's case, the later controversies centered not on disputing who had carried out the assassination, but on examining whether warning signs had been sufficiently recognized before it occurred. These questions would continue to appear in legal and historical discussions for many years. Despite these lingering debates, the central conclusions of the investigation remained consistent. No confirmed evidence established the existence of a larger hidden conspiracy beyond Brigada Etniai. Marzo. The official findings continue to identify the organization itself as directly responsible for planning and executing the assassination. The evidence gathered during the investigation, reinforced by the cooperation of Marco Barbone, established a coherent reconstruction of how the murder had been organized and carried out. By the time investigators completed their work, the principal mystery surrounding Walter Tabajai's death had largely been resolved. The identity of the killers was known. The organization responsible had been dismantled. The operational planning behind the assassination had been reconstructed. Yet resolution in an investigative sense did not necessarily produce satisfaction in a moral or emotional one. For Walter Tabajai's family, no amount of investigative success could restore the husband and father they had lost. For Italy's journalistic community, the murder remained a reminder that truthful reporting could exact the highest possible price. For the broader public, the investigation demonstrated both the capabilities and the limitations of the state's struggle against political terrorism. It showed that determined investigative work could identify and dismantle violent organizations. But it also revealed how difficult it could be to prevent carefully planned acts of terrorism before innocent lives were taken. With the investigation substantially complete and the principal suspects now in custody, attention shifted from police work to judicial proceedings. The facts collected by investigators would soon be examined in court, where questions of guilt, responsibility, cooperation, and punishment would become the center of national attention. The trial that followed would prove almost as controversial as the assassination itself, largely because the cooperation that had helped solve the case would ultimately influence the sentences imposed upon those responsible, provoking intense public debate over whether justice had truly been served. The trial of those responsible for the murder of Walter Tabajai opened in 1983, 3 years after the assassination that had shocked Milan and reverberated across Italy. By the time the proceedings began, the essential facts of the case were already well established through the work of investigators. Brigada XXVI Marzo had been identified as the organization responsible for the attack. Its members had been arrested. The role of each participant had been examined during the investigation, and the testimony of Marco Barbone had already introduced a level of internal clarity that few terrorism cases of the era achieved so quickly. Yet despite the relative clarity of the factual reconstruction, the courtroom would become the stage for intense debate over responsibility, cooperation with authorities, and the meaning of justice in cases of political violence. At the center of the proceedings stood Marco Barbone, the leader of Brigada XXVI Marzo and one of the principal participants in the assassination. His decision to cooperate with investigators had already transformed the course of the inquiry. In court, that cooperation became the defining feature of his legal position. Under Italian law at the time, individuals who provided substantial assistance to authorities in dismantling terrorist organizations could be granted special consideration as cooperating defendants. Barbone's testimony had not only confirmed his own involvement in the murder, but also helped authorities dismantle the structure of his organization and identify its members. As a result, the court was required to weigh his direct participation in a politically motivated assassination against the legal framework that rewarded collaboration in the fight against terrorism. The sentencing reflected this tension. Marco Barbone was sentenced to approximately 8 years and 9 months in prison. In purely numerical terms, the sentence appeared strikingly short when compared to the gravity of the crime. The deliberate assassination of a journalist in broad daylight. For many observers, including members of the public and colleagues of Walter DeBejai, the sentence raised immediate and difficult questions. How could an individual directly involved in such a calculated killing receive a punishment measured in single-digit years? The answer lay in the legal structure designed to encourage cooperation from members of clandestine organizations. The rationale behind such provisions was pragmatic rather than emotional. Italian authorities faced a deeply entrenched problem of political terrorism, and traditional investigative methods were often insufficient to penetrate the secrecy of extremist groups. By offering reduced sentences to those who chose to collaborate, the legal system aimed to incentivize internal disclosures that could dismantle entire organizations. In the case of Brigata XXVI Marzo, that strategy had succeeded in providing investigators with critical information. However, the application of that principle in a case involving the murder of a journalist created profound discomfort among segments of the public. Barbone's cooperation also had consequences beyond his own sentencing. Several other defendants who had participated in or supported the organization received reduced penalties due to varying degrees of collaboration or mitigating circumstances. Those who chose not to cooperate faced significantly harsher outcomes, with sentences reaching up to approximately 30 years in prison. The disparity between sentences became one of the most contentious aspects of the trial. It highlighted a fundamental tension in the justice system's approach to terrorism cases. The need to dismantle dangerous networks through insider testimony versus the expectation of proportional punishment for severe crimes. For the family of Walter DeBejai, the legal outcome could not be separated from personal loss. The trial determined legal responsibility and imposed penalties, but it could not restore what had been taken. Walter DeBejai's wife, Maristella, and their children, including his daughter Benedetta, were left to process the reality that the man responsible for the assassination had received what many considered a relatively lenient sentence in exchange for cooperation. For them, the courtroom outcome underscored a painful distinction between legal resolution and emotional closure. Across Italy, the verdict prompted wider debate about justice in the context of political violence. Some viewed the sentencing framework as a necessary compromise in the struggle against terrorism. They argued that without incentives for cooperation, many extremist organizations would remain impenetrable, and investigations like that of Brigata XXVI Marzo would take far longer or fail entirely. Others, however, saw the outcome as a troubling imbalance, where the severity of the crime appeared diminished by procedural considerations. The idea that a participant in a politically motivated assassination could receive a reduced sentence in exchange for information created discomfort that extended beyond legal circles into public discourse. The trial, therefore, became more than a determination of individual guilt. It became a reflection of Italy's broader struggle to respond to a wave of political violence that had defined the preceding decade. Courts were not only tasked with punishing crimes, but also with supporting a wider strategy aimed at dismantling extremist networks that threaten the stability of the state. This dual responsibility placed significant pressure on judicial institutions, which had to balance legal principles with practical considerations of national security. Throughout the proceedings, the figure of Walter DeBejai remained central, even in his absence. His name was repeatedly invoked, not only as the victim of the crime, but also as a symbol of the risks faced by journalists during the years of lead. His assassination had not been an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of violence. directed at individuals who documented and analyzed extremist activity. In this sense, the trial also served as a public acknowledgement of the dangers that had confronted those working in the press during that period. Yet despite the formal conclusion of the legal process, the case did not fade from public attention. Instead, it continued to generate discussion long after the sentences were handed down. The relatively short prison term received by Marco Barbone, in particular, remained a focal point of controversy, even as he served his sentence under the provisions applicable to cooperating defendants. Questions persisted about whether the balance between justice and pragmatism had been appropriately struck. These debates reflected a broader uncertainty within Italian society about how to interpret and respond to the legacy of political terrorism. The judicial outcome also highlighted the evolving nature of Italy's legal response to extremist violence. The use of cooperating witnesses represented a strategic shift in addressing organizations that operated in secrecy and relied on internal loyalty. While effective in disrupting groups like Brigata XXVI Marzo, this approach inevitably introduced moral and emotional complexity into the courtroom. It required society to accept that some individuals involved in serious crimes might receive reduced sentences in exchange for dismantling the very networks they had helped build. In the years following the trial, this tension remained unresolved in public consciousness. The legal system had achieved its immediate objective, the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible for the assassination. Yet the broader questions raised by the case about proportional justice, the ethics of cooperation, and the cost of dismantling extremist networks continued to resonate. For those closest to Walter Tabegiai, the legal proceedings could never fully encompass the meaning of their loss. For the country, the trial became another chapter in the long and difficult effort to confront the violence of the years of Lead, a period in which justice often had to operate within imperfect and painful constraints. The conclusion of the Walter Tabegiai case does not rest on a single moment of resolution, but rather on the long shadow it cast over Italian society, journalism, and the historical memory of the years of Lead. Even after the trial ended in 1983 and the sentences were issued, the case continued to exist in public discussion as something larger than a closed judicial file. It became part of a wider national reflection on how Italy had endured a decade of political violence in which ordinary professions, teachers, judges, police officers, politicians, and journalists were transformed into potential targets. Walter Tabegiai's name gradually came to represent not only the specific tragedy of his assassination, but also the vulnerability of those who chose to document and analyze extremist movements during one of the most unstable periods in modern Italian history. In official terms, responsibility for the murder remained clearly attributed to the organization Brigata XXVI Marzo, and the investigative work, led under the coordination of figures such as Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, had already established a coherent reconstruction of how the assassination had been planned and executed. Yet public memory of the case did not remain confined to legal conclusions. Instead, it expanded into broader debates about prevention, responsibility, and the structural challenges faced by the Italian state during the years of Lead. One of the persistent issues surrounding the case was the suggestion that warning signs may have existed prior to the assassination. Discussions emerged over whether intelligence information or surveillance data indicating a possible threat had been fully processed or acted upon in time. These questions did not alter the established responsibility of the perpetrators, but they contributed to an ongoing reflection about the limitations of state institutions during a period when multiple terrorist organizations were operating simultaneously across the country. The difficulty was not necessarily a lack of awareness of danger, but rather the sheer volume and fragmentation of information available to law enforcement agencies attempting to track numerous clandestine networks at once. In this environment, even relevant intelligence could be lost, delayed, or not fully connected to a specific imminent threat. The case of Walter Tabajai, therefore, became part of a broader historical discussion about whether Italy's security apparatus, despite its eventual successes in dismantling terrorist organizations, could have prevented certain attacks if coordination and interpretation of intelligence had been more effective. At the same time, it is important to note that no confirmed evidence ever established the existence of a larger hidden conspiracy behind the assassination beyond the actions of Brigata XXVI Marzo. The official findings consistently maintain that the group itself was directly responsible for planning and carrying out the murder. And this conclusion remained unchanged throughout subsequent legal and historical evaluations. What continued to be debated was not the identity of the perpetrators, but the environment in which such groups were able to operate and the extent to which their activities might have been anticipated or disrupted earlier. Within journalism, the legacy of Walter Tabajai became particularly significant. His work had exemplified a form of reporting that combined careful investigation with intellectual restraint, avoiding sensationalism while still addressing highly sensitive and dangerous subjects. He had sought to understand extremist violence not as isolated acts of chaos, but as phenomena rooted in ideological, social, and organizational dynamics. This approach, while academically rigorous and widely respected, placed him in a position of increasing visibility among the very groups he analyzed. After his death, his professional legacy was frequently invoked in discussions about the responsibilities and risks of investigative journalism. He came to symbolize the idea that the pursuit of understanding, even when conducted with caution and balance, could still carry profound personal danger in contexts where violence replaces dialogue. Over time, his story also took on a deeply personal dimension through his family, particularly through his daughter Benedetta Tabajai, who later became a writer and researcher focused on the memory of terrorism victims in Italy. Her work contributed to the preservation of historical memory surrounding the years of Lead, ensuring that the experiences of victims were not reduced to abstract political events, but remained connected to human consequences. In this way, the impact of Walter Tabajai's life extended beyond his own journalism into a generational effort to document and interpret a painful chapter in Italian history. The murder itself also continued to serve as a reference point in discussions about the relationship between the press and political violence. It highlighted the risks faced by journalists who investigate extremist movements and underscored the importance of press freedom in democratic societies. While Italy eventually succeeded in significantly reducing the threat posed by domestic terrorist organizations, the memory of cases like Tabajai's remains a reminder that periods of intense political polarization can place journalists in positions of extreme vulnerability. His assassination demonstrated how individuals dedicated to explaining violence can become perceived as participants in conflict simply because their work exposes uncomfortable truths. The aftermath of the case also reflects the complex balance between justice and practical necessity. In combating terrorism, the cooperation of Marco Barbone, which had been instrumental in dismantling Brigata XXVI Marzo and advancing the investigation, illustrated the legal strategy of using insider testimony to penetrate secretive organizations. At the same time, the reduced sentence he received compared to the severity of the crime remained a source of public debate and emotional tension. This tension encapsulated a broader dilemma faced by the Italian judicial system during the years of Lead: the need to dismantle violent networks efficiently versus the expectation of proportional punishment for acts of extreme brutality. The resolution of the case, therefore, did not produce a simple sense of closure. Instead, it left behind a layered legacy in which legal success, moral discomfort, and historical reflection coexist. The individuals directly responsible were identified and convicted. Yet the meaning of the event continued to evolve as Italy processed the broader consequences of its years of political violence. Today, the assassination of Walter Tabajai is remembered not only as an isolated act of terrorism, but as part of a wider historical landscape in which ideology, violence, and journalism collided with devastating consequences. His death marked another point in a long sequence of attacks that defined the years of Lead. But his life remains equally important in understanding what was lost. He represented a form of journalism committed to clarity, context, and analysis at a time when confusion and fear often dominated public discourse. The fact that he was targeted precisely because of that work underscores the central tragedy of his story. In reflecting on his legacy, the most enduring image is not only the moment of violence on Via Saleno in Milan, but also the intellectual commitment that defined his career. Walter Tabajai did not seek confrontation. He sought understanding. He did not promote ideology. He examined it. Yet in a period where interpretation itself could be seen as opposition, even measured analysis became dangerous. His assassination remains a reminder that the protection of those who investigate power, ideology, and violence is not simply a matter of professional safety, but a fundamental requirement for any society that seeks to understand itself honestly. What remains after a case like the murder of Walter Tabajai is never just a closed file or a set of court rulings, even when the investigation has identified the perpetrators, even when the trial has assigned legal responsibility, and even when the broader network behind the crime has been dismantled, something more persistent continues to exist in public memory. It is the question of what his death ultimately meant, and why it continues to be remembered decades later in a country that was already accustomed to political violence during the years of Lead. In the years following the trial, Italy gradually moved away from the most intense phase of domestic terrorism. But the memory of those events did not fade cleanly. Instead, it settled into a long process of reflection, documentation, and reinterpretation. Within that process, the figure of Walter Tabajai came to occupy a particular position, not as a political actor, not as a victim of a random crime, but as a journalist whose work placed him directly in the line of ideological conflict. His reporting had focused on understanding the structure and evolution of extremist organizations, especially those operating on the far left. He had examined their internal contradictions, including the growing disconnect between their claimed representation of the working class and the actual social backgrounds of many of their members. He had also observed a shift in which violence itself appeared to become an end rather than a means. These were not abstract observations. They were direct analyses of living organizations active in Italy at the time, and they placed him in a position of increasing visibility among the groups he studied. After his assassination, those aspects of his work were re-examined with even greater intensity. His articles were no longer read only as journalism, but also as documentation of a period in which understanding extremism required entering into uncomfortable proximity with it. The fact that he was targeted by Brigata XXVI Marzo, a small but ideologically aligned militant group, reinforced the perception that his reporting had struck at the core of how these organizations understood themselves. The investigation had already established that the group had conducted surveillance on him, learned his routines, and selected a moment of predictable vulnerability outside his home on Via Saleno in Milan. The method of the attack, fast, coordinated, and executed with lethal intent, fit the broader pattern of political assassinations during the years of Lead. when symbolic targets were often chosen to send messages beyond the immediate act of killing. In Tubejai's case, however, the message appears to have been aimed at silencing analysis itself. Yet the outcome was not what the perpetrators had intended. Instead of diminishing the visibility of his work, the assassination ensured that his name became permanently associated with the dangers faced by journalists who investigate political violence. In the decades that followed, his case was frequently referenced in discussions about press freedom in Italy, particularly in relation to the risks inherent in reporting on extremist movements. His daughter, Benedetta Tubejai, later played an important role in preserving the memory of victims of terrorism, contributing to a broader cultural effort in Italy to document the human consequences of that era rather than allowing it to remain only a political or judicial subject. Through this, the personal dimension of the tragedy remained present in public consciousness, reminding later generations that behind every case file and court ruling were families who had experienced irreversible loss. At the same time, the legal and political debates surrounding the case continued to reflect unresolved tensions. The cooperation of Marco Barbone with authorities, which had been instrumental in dismantling Brigata XXVI Marzo and accelerating the investigation, remained a focal point of discussion. His reduced sentence, made possible by legal provisions encouraging collaboration with justice in terrorism cases, continued to raise questions about proportionality and the balance between pragmatic law enforcement and retributive justice. While the effectiveness of such cooperation in breaking down clandestine organizations was widely acknowledged, it also left a lasting sense of unease for those who measured justice primarily through the severity of punishment relative to the crime committed. Another element that persisted in historical discussion was the broader question of prevention. Although the official findings attributed the assassination directly to Brigata XXVI Marzo and did not support the existence of a wider conspiracy, later reflections sometimes returned to the issue of whether warning signs had been fully acted upon. Reports of intelligence awareness and fragmented information circulated in debates about institutional capacity during the years of lead, when law enforcement agencies were simultaneously tracking multiple active terrorist networks. The complexity of that environment meant that even when partial information existed, connecting it into a clear preventive response was often extremely difficult. In this sense, the Tubejai case became part of a larger historical examination of the limits of state response during a period of sustained internal conflict. What ultimately defines the legacy of Walter Tubejai, however, is not the procedural complexity of the investigation or the legal debates that followed the trial, but the nature of his work itself. He represented a form of journalism grounded in careful analysis rather than ideological positioning. He approached extremist violence not as spectacle, but as a phenomenon requiring explanation, tracing its origins, examining its structures, and identifying the contradictions within it. That approach made his reporting valuable, but it also placed him in a vulnerable position in a climate where interpretation was often treated as opposition. His death, therefore, stands at the intersection of journalism and political violence in a way that continues to be studied and referenced in discussions about the role of the press in democratic societies. In remembering the case today, the focus gradually shifts away from the mechanics of the crime and toward its implications. The assassination of Walter Tubejai is no longer only viewed as a single act carried out by a specific group during a defined historical period. It is also understood as part of a broader pattern in which individuals who attempt to document and analyze violence can themselves become targets of that violence. The conclusion of the legal process did not end that reality, but it did establish a factual foundation upon which later generations could reflect. What remains is a recognition that the work of understanding political extremism carries inherent risks, particularly in periods when ideological conflict escalates into physical confrontation. Walter Tabajai's life and death, therefore, continue to function as a reference point in discussions about the responsibilities and dangers of journalism. His reporting sought to clarify a world shaped by fear and violence. His assassination demonstrated how fragile that effort can become when those being analyzed reject analysis itself. In that contrast lies the enduring significance of his story, not as an isolated tragedy, but as part of a larger historical lesson about the relationship between truth, power, and violence. In the aftermath of the legal proceedings and the passage of time, the murder of Walter Tabajai remained fixed in Italian collective memory not as an isolated criminal case, but as part of a broader historical period defined by political violence and ideological extremism. Even after Brigata XXVI Marzo was dismantled and its members prosecuted, the deeper questions raised by the assassination continued to resonate beyond the courtroom and beyond the immediate political climate of the early 1980s. The case became one of the clearest examples of how journalism itself had become entangled in the violent dynamics of the years of Lead, a period in which reporting, analysis, and interpretation could be perceived as acts of opposition by those committed to armed ideology. Tabajai's work had placed him in direct proximity to the structures of extremist organizations, not through participation, but through detailed observation and explanation. His reporting examined the evolution of left-wing terrorist groups in Italy, their internal contradictions, and the shifting social composition of their members. He had observed that many militants no longer fit the image of working-class representation they claimed to embody, and that violence increasingly functioned as a defining objective rather than a strategic instrument. These analyses, grounded in journalistic investigation, became part of the intellectual framework through which terrorism in Italy was understood at the time. Yet they also contributed to the perception among certain militants that Tabajai had moved beyond neutral observation into the realm of ideological challenge. The events that led to his death on May 28, 1980, demonstrated how that perception translated into action. Brigata XXVI Marzo conducted surveillance on his daily movements, identified his routines, and selected a moment of predictable vulnerability outside his home in Milan. The assassination itself was swift and deliberate, carried out with the intention of eliminating him as he left for work. The forensic reconstruction confirmed multiple gunshots, including a fatal wound to the heart and a final shot fired at close range after he had already fallen. The violence ended in seconds, but its consequences extended far beyond that moment. The investigation that followed, led by Italian authorities under the coordination of experienced anti-terrorism figures, revealed the structured nature of the attack. Within months, the organization responsible was identified and dismantled. The arrest of Marco Barbone and other members of Brigata XXVI Marzo provided direct access to internal testimony, which confirmed the planning, execution, and motivations behind the assassination. Barbone's subsequent cooperation with investigators played a decisive role in reconstructing the full scope of the group's activities and contributed to the broader effort to map extremist networks operating in Italy during that period. The trial that followed in 1983 translated those findings into legal judgment. Barbone and his associates were sentenced according to a framework that included provisions for cooperation with justice, resulting in significantly reduced sentences for those who provided assistance in dismantling the organization. This outcome reflected a legal strategy developed in response to terrorism cases, where insider testimony was considered essential for penetrating clandestine structures. At the same time, it generated ongoing debate about proportionality and justice, particularly in cases involving the targeted killing of civilians such as journalists. Beyond the courtroom, the legacy of the case evolved in a different direction. Walter Tabajai's name became associated with a broader struggle for press freedom during one of the most dangerous periods in modern Italian history. His assassination highlighted the risks faced by journalists who investigated extremist movements, and his work continued to be referenced as an example of analytical journalism conducted under conditions of political instability and threat. Over time, his story also became part of a wider cultural process of remembrance, in which the victims of terrorism were gradually recognized not only as figures in legal history, but as individuals whose lives were shaped and ended by the ideological conflicts of their time. The memory of the case also remained connected to unresolved questions that extended beyond the identification and conviction of the perpetrators. Discussions persisted regarding whether warning signs had been fully recognized prior to the assassination, and whether the fragmentation of intelligence during the years of lead had limited the ability of authorities to prevent certain attacks. These reflections formed part of a broader historical assessment of the period, rather than a challenge to the established findings of responsibility. No alternative theory replaced the conclusion that Brigata XXVI Marzo carried out the murder, but the environment in which such groups operated continued to be examined in historical and institutional analysis. Ultimately, the enduring significance of the case lies in its convergence of journalism, ideology, and violence. Walter Tabajai's career represented a commitment to understanding complex and dangerous phenomena through careful reporting rather than simplification. His death demonstrated the extreme consequences that could arise when that work intersected with a climate of armed political extremism. The separation between observer and target collapsed in a moment of violence that reflected the broader instability of the era. In the years since, his name has remained part of Italy's collective reflection on the years of lead, not as a symbol of political alignment, but as a reminder of the risks faced by those who attempt to document truth in times of ideological conflict. His legacy endures in the continued recognition of journalism as both a public service and, in certain historical moments, a deeply vulnerable profession.